Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. It seems almost just, I don't know, trite to say it, but this election campaign is like no other. What has triggered it, what has changed in the course of the debate, and what seems to be changing literally by the minute in this campaign. But still, we are going to try and get through the horse race numbers and all of that and take a little look at what's underneath, what's inside the voters' heads at this point, and what might change that over the course of the campaign. So away we go to have a conversation with Allan Gregg. He's a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies, co-host of his own podcast, Red Tory, and that's what we used to call progressive conservatives when that party existed. Hi, Allan. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
Good. And I was just saying to Allan, just as we were getting started here, that I had come across online a piece because Allan and I, just for context, we arrived in Ottawa about the same time in the early 70s. Or in the mid 70s. Let's just say we were 12 at the time. Yes. Okay.
We were babies.
Oh, we were total babies. And
babies from the prairies.
Yes, babies from the prairies. Him from Alberta, yes. Me from Saskatchewan. So he has written this piece online about his history, and he says, if there was one day that defined what I was going to become professionally, it was probably May 22nd, 1979. That was the day for the first time in 16 years that Joe Clark became Government of Canada, and you were the pollster to the Prime Minister of Canada. I can't imagine what you think about this campaign today versus the one you were on there. Can you name 4 things that have changed so radically that your head is spinning?
Well, in fact, the reason I started that Substack series is, you're supposed to believe that as you get older, you get wiser. And I have never felt more confused in my life.
Yeah.
Or more dubious about my understanding of what's happening politically, the socio-political culture of North America. So I said, maybe it's time to start reaching out a little bit and interacting a little more with people who are engaged in the same space and hopefully get some learning. So it's not just vanity, but there's also learning at stake. But in the 79 campaign, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Nothing happened. I was the first one to ever do nightly tracking, where every morning, 6 o'clock, I was able to generate numbers from the night before, and nothing happened throughout the entire course of the campaign. So this, I think you can kind of predict something's going to happen. What it is, we don't know, but something will.
The unique issues in this campaign, and I'll just frame one for you and let you, as we kind of, this conversation unfolds here. So the focus for 3 years, we've been talking about change, and we've seen the conservative numbers go up and up and up with the need for change. Then Justin Trudeau leaves, and people wonder whether change will still be the issue. Pierre Poilievre had to figure out a way to pivot, change his whole approach to this. So that's one whole issue. On the flip side, the Liberals, under a new leadership, so they're now trying to grab the change mantle, are now shedding all of the things that they believed in, defended, supported, and put forward to the electorate for the last 10 years, the capital gains tax. So they're having their own crisis pivoting. So what do you make of these two forces at play?
Well, I mean, that's the first thing, is that, the context of the election has shifted so dramatically from what it had been for 2.5 years, which was a focus on past grievances. I'm not happy with what has transpired in that period, and I'm certainly not happy with the people who have overseen that deterioration in terms of quality of life, cost of living, housing affordability, deteriorating healthcare system, and just economic uncertainty, like I said, to now future uncertainty. And with that shift, the demands and of what skill requirements are necessary to deal with one set of problems versus historic problems are completely different. And so the shift has robbed Poilievre of a very impactful and powerful narrative that he has. The country is broken. Do you want 4 more years of these guys? You really want to give these guys 4 more years? You don't reward that bad behavior. To, can I stand up as an opposition leader with no real credentials, in any other environment other than politics, to this uncertain future that is presented to ourselves? Enter Mark Carney, central banker, business person. What do those kind of people have? Well, they're decisive, they're strong, they have experience in crises. So all of a sudden, this new guy has got all of these qualifications necessary to meet the new problems. Ergo, you see a change in polling, the likes. I mean, the only time I've ever seen a move that quickly, believe it or not, again, talk about sound like a nostalgic old fart, was after Pierre Elliott Trudeau introduced the War Measures Act, where the party went up 19 points in 1 month. So this is historic, because anyway, let me just stop there.
Yeah, so this is, I think the horse race numbers are going to be hard to follow because, it's neck and neck. And I'm assuming, and I'll ask as opposed to assuming, that there's no real way for the NDP to reestablish itself. So the Liberals have become the progressives, as the phrase that's used stateside, right? And they're going to consume those two entities, the NDP and the Liberals.
They've really sucked up. I mean, a lot of the ascendancy of the Liberals is not coming from the Conservatives. The Conservatives haven't really gone down that much. And we've seen this before. The 2015 election, I mean, I used to think that strategic voting was a figment of academics' imaginations. In 2015, as it appeared that Justin Trudeau had a better chance than Mulcair to beat Stephen Harper, that NDP vote just gravitated to the Liberals, and the porousness between the Liberal and the NDP vote for the last decade is quite stunning. There's virtually not a Liberal who wouldn't vote NDP, and not a New Democrat who wouldn't vote Liberal. So that all said, and Jagmeet Singh has been the biggest victim of this change as a consequence. He now has he now has much more room on the left than he's ever had before, because Carney also does represent a movement to the center, which is good for the Liberals. Because if you look at the data, you dig down deep, the people who feel the least represented by politics today are not people who have strong views. They're people who are in the middle, who just say, none of these guys represent me. A consensus seeker, a compromise maker, someone who focuses on results, not process, doesn't get into slanging matches. So Carney fits all of these tests, but he does give Jagmeet Singh much more room to articulate a real left of center position. I mean, one of the reasons the Liberal and NDP vote is so porous is because most of the voters see no difference between the two of them whatsoever under Justin Trudeau.
You think there's actually a chance that the NDP could go from, I don't know, rump to larger rump, I guess, and get some back?
I just wrote an article for the Toronto Star for this week, and I said, if you consider yourself a betting person, you want to place a wager on this election, keep your money in your pocket.
Yeah, because who knows?
I think that's actually possible. Is it likely? No. I think that probably what is more likely is that because of the stakes that are at play here, they will become completely marginalized in a two-party race. And the real question is who's going to be the prime minister. So
come back to that issue, because that's kind of the thinking here, that Mark Carney, the banker, the numbers guy, is that he's kind of moving it to the center. But there's also that tug and pull from what I mentioned before. Do people really believe that this guy wants to undo the carbon tax? He may want to undo the capital gains tax, but he has spent the last 20 years of his life committed to net zero and all of these things. So can he really sell, I'm moving to the middle and I'm your business guy and I'm going to build a whole bunch of pipelines and become an energy czar?
You'll know part of this history that in 1944, coming up to 1945, when Mackenzie King was the prime minister of Canada, and the CCF just formed out of Saskatchewan, and they were actually leading the Gallup poll at some point. The Gallup poll was the only poll that was there. Mackenzie King says, if you want to stop creeping socialism, steal their clothes. And that's what Mark Carney has done. He has basically said a big strength that Poilievre had was axe the tax, accelerate economic development, especially in the resource sector. And so he just kind of stole Poilievre's clothes there. Whether that's credible or not, given his history, I mean, he did lead an entire global coalition on zero carbon that basically was saying, do not finance any industries that will actually generate more carbon emissions, or do not make that same commitment to net zero. So whether it's credible or not, don't know. But he really has kind of robbed, what Poilievre's, he's been robbed of kind of his narrative, but he's also been robbed of a focus on the record, both because Carney's got a little bit more distance, obviously, not having been a formal part of that government, but also because his concerns are much more future oriented than they were past oriented right now. So, as I said elsewhere, I mean, he has to find not just a new songbook; he has to find a new voice. Where saying Canada was broken was very good politics 3 months ago. Today, it's heresy. You're not allowed to say that. In the face of this growing sense of pride, and we need to come together, and all of these other sorts of things. So what I've also said is that I believe that Poilievre's hill is steeper than Carney's right now, but it also has fewer potholes in it where you can stumble. While Carney's been able to distance himself, he still represents that brand.
Yeah.
We were around in 1993, and people said, "What happened there?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what happened. Is Canadians re-reached a conclusion they'd already embraced for 4 years. Is if these guys have got to go." Yeah. And if you look, that Abacus did a very good poll just recently, and you've still got 70% of the population today saying it'd either be nice or it would be definitely as important that we have a change in government right now. So that's still there. And while the focus has shifted, the concerns that were prevalent in last calendar year are still there, especially among young people, among blue collar workers, among new Canadians. And anyone who's been involved in politics for the last 2 decades knows you cannot win without those 3 constituencies. Young people, maybe not so much. They're a little bit more unpredictable. And Poilievre had been able to really galvanize a sense with those constituencies that he understood them. And I was very interested to watch his opening remarks, because he's on his heels still, and he's still floundering. But he did go to his origin story, which is remarkably compelling. I mean, it really is. What? That's how you grew up, and you ended up being a human being. That incredible wife, those children. And he tells a story about the single mother who wakes up at night fearful that she can't feed her children, or the 30-year-old who's relegated to the parents' basement with no home ownership. Did we pay a lot in tariffs today, or a little bit? I don't know. Yeah, but I do know if I'm worried about whether I can buy a home. And so if he can get people refocused on the less abstract problems, back to the real personal problems, and position himself as more relatable than a guy who clearly may be competent, but is an autocrat, he's out of touch, he's aloof, doesn't understand you.
That whole thing, and I've seen a lot of this on X at this point, which is, the Gen Xers, but Gen Y and Z more particularly, just going, tariffs. What do you mean tariffs? Like, I already can't afford groceries, and I am living in my parents' basement, and I'll never buy a house, and I'm not sure I can get married because I just don't have the wherewithal. Like, so the boomer group is focused on Trump and tariffs, there is this whole other story.
Oh, yeah, no. We all talk about the ballot question and the old political maxim, find an issue and make it your issue. The same Abacus poll, looked at the people whose principal concern was standing up to Trump. Liberals have a 30% lead among those people. Right. Looked at the people whose main concern is cost of living, affordability. Poilievre has a 20% lead with those people. So it really is a question of, whose question is going to dominate at the ballot box and prevail over the course of the campaign. When you talk about Carney's vulnerability, he is on the ascent right now. There's no question like that. What if on April 2nd, Donald Trump says, I've reconsidered. Canada's a good friend. Yeah. We're not going to have tariffs.
No tariffs. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. What are we saving Canada from?
Yeah, no, exactly. But that's
Yeah,
where you, from your opening remarks. I mean,
yeah,
we've never had an election like this where those kind of extraneous variables can come out of nowhere and just completely change the course of events. I mean, we were both around in 1988
yeah,
when we started that campaign. I was working for Brian Mulroney. We did not want that campaign to be about free trade because we knew, even though about 60% of the population supported the notion, that there's a tremendous vulnerability in that issue. And John Turner was able to open it up, and I'm telling you, that night the polls started to shift. I'd never seen anything like that. Now we were able to reverse
yeah,
it, but that change was generated by an actual campaign event.
yeah.
We have that
A
magnitude
debate.
of
Yeah,
change, even that bigger, that could be manifest by. It's like the Americans always talk about the October surprise.
right.
Something happens outside of planned events, and just everything changes. And that prospect
No,
is
it's
very
just
real.
just to remind people that these things happen. I mean, John Turner and Brian Mulroney were in the midst of a debate, and John Turner had appointed a bunch of people that the Liberals had decided should be appointed in the last waning hours of their government. And he said, "Well, I had to do it." And Brian Mulroney said, "No, sir, you had an option." And it,
That's 84. Yeah.
yeah, but everything just changes in the middle
Oh,
of a campaign moment in 1 second, right?
but they're almost always, the ones I can think of. They almost always been generated by a political debate. And this time, who knows?
Yeah. I want to stay on the age thing for a moment because it's kind of the coalition that Trump appealed to, going to the Joe Rogan gang and the young men particularly that are
Right.
feeling displaced. And it was again all of the hoopla around the Mike Myers Mark Carney ad. They're sitting there in their hockey jerseys and they're talking about, the test of what makes a Canadian. And everybody thought, isn't that great? And elbows up and this and that. Then you start reading what the younger um, group are, the younger folks, what the younger people are saying. And it's like, who's Mr. Dress Up? Who's Howie Meeker? Like, what are you talking about?
We
It
forget that. We forget that. Yeah.
it just they just didn't relate to it. I mean, two
Oh,
guys with, looking older talking about stuff they don't know. Like it I know that the young vote is unreliable or the younger vote, whether they're going to show up, but Donald Trump built a pretty important coalition around that.
oh, it's a and the guy named David Shore, who very capable American pollster, just released a massive study that he had done, and one of his conclusions is as in the United States, is that Generation Z, maybe Z, I guess in the States,
Yeah.
may be the most conservative generation in 60 years. And it's because that generation, they're saying, let me take a step back.
Yep.
When you and I were young, not only were we optimistic about the future, everyone was optimistic about the future
Yeah. True.
because the notion was that tomorrow was going to be better than today. That is completely gone as a cultural phenomenon, but especially gone with young people. We were told, if you work hard and put your mind to it, you can be anything you want. You, my child, have the right to expect more than I had when I was growing up. And a good education is the key to success in the future.
Yeah.
And we had a life that corresponded with those beliefs. These kids don't believe any of that. Emerson College asked 18 to 29-year-olds, do you think it's very or somewhat acceptable that Luigi Mangione shot the CEO
Yeah.
of United Healthcare?
Yeah.
47% thought it was acceptable.
Yeah.
Not because they want mass murders or assassinations, but you say, fuck that guy.
Yeah. It's unfair.
Fuck the man. And so they're saying, not only does the system not represent me, not only does the system not work for me, the system is working against me.
Yeah.
And this was, again, why if Poilievre can kind of tap in to that sense, not the darker side of
No,
that
no,
sense,
no.
but that sense that, I get you, I hear you. And I've always said this, that while voting is a relatively emotional response, largely derived from personalizing the options that are available to you. that at the end of the day, what people do is they subconsciously make what is a fairly rational calculation. They say, who is like me, self-image, and who is for me, self-interest. And if you can answer me, and that's why one of the best proxies for leadership preference in polling always is, which one of these people would you like to have a go for a beer with?
Yeah.
Mostly. Because so that relatability issue is there. And again, I've also written, I mean, Carney is while he's got all of these leadership attributes, he's not defined himself as a person at all, as someone who he cares about, what he cares about, why he wants to fix problems.
Yeah.
And again, in his performance, I don't know if that's part of his métier, his instinct. I mean, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, central bankers don't stand there and do press conferences with, journalists saying, you're talking about something that happened 5 seconds ago, right? He's used to a situation. He's had he's had a few stumbles already because he doesn't know how to deal with the media.
He looked very chippy when they were challenging him on his conflict of interest stuff. Right. Very chippy. It's like, how dare you ask me these questions?
Yeah. And the thing about the conflict of interest issue is it's probably too complicated for most people to focus in on. But how you react to it and what the look on your face is something that people can relate to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So that gets us to I don't know. I think you wrote this the other day, the character versus competence. And whether or not, I mean, because both candidates embraced both of those things, to Poilievre going, I feel your pain, I hear you, I'm going to represent you, and has lots of political experience. I mean, this is, his downside is his upside. It's all he's ever done. And then you've got, Carney, who maybe leads with the competence, but people have to believe he must be an upstanding citizen, or how would he have gotten this far and been the governor? So how's that gonna break down those two issues and those two guys?
We don't know. I mean, right now, character is Carney's vulnerability because he's not defined, and it's the old saying, if you don't define yourself, someone else is going to define you for you. And it's so difficult for an opposition leader to run on competence, and especially when the competence test is foreign affairs. Yeah, because then basically voters got to make 3 judgments. Do I like this person in the job he's in? Would this person be good as prime minister? Yeah. What kind of guy would this be on world stage? Okay. And it's why, and I hate to even bring this up, in 1993, I mean, I got accused of making fun of Jean Chrétien's face. I mean, that wasn't what I was doing. I mean, no matter how venal and stupid you believe I am, the notion of I got an idea. I'm 21 points behind. Let's make a fun of someone's face. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It was because what we saw was that the weak link in the Liberal chain was Jean Chrétien. He was actually running behind Carney. Running behind Campbell, even while the Conservative Party was trailing badly. And where he fared the worst was on foreign affairs. And so again, Poilievre suffers in that regard simply by virtue of the position he occupies. And we saw how effective, Doug Ford was in that provincial campaign by running not as the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, but as the premier of Ontario.
Yeah, and Captain Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, and if Carney is smart, which is kind of ironic given that he's never been elected to anything. That's what he will do. He will run in this campaign. He will be the prime minister of Canada. And so, what did you do today, Mr.?
I think he's trying
he is.
But he's 9 days on the job, and when he goes to Europe, there's not. He didn't get to bring much home other than some photo ops. There was no big win there. And then when he says stuff like, "We're the most European of the non-European nations." Does that resonate? I just kind of sat back when I heard that.
No, I think what he was trying to do is show that he had an alternative path, that he doesn't have to rely on the United States. The fact that I don't know if he's making it up, but the fact that he's claiming now that he's not going to speak to Trump until after the election is probably a mistake and also unsustainable.
Yeah.
Because he is the prime minister of Canada
Yeah. And there's
for
going to
good
be
or
a moment.
evil. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people have argued don't do it because you don't want your Zelensky moment. You don't want to be sitting there. But the other thing is, I mean, there was another story today. Again, you have no idea how much of this is true, is because Brookfield is under some kind of investigation that now Trump has said, I can't talk to him because it would be a conflict. Who knows?
I missed
Right?
that. Wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, it may have only been passing because it should be only a passing commentary, but there is a lot of downside to meeting with Trump for all the
Oh, for
obvious
sure.
reasons. But if you are the prime minister and if he's the president, you don't have to love the people you do business with, but you have to do business.
No. April 2nd is in a couple of days. They
Yeah.
are going to announce something.
Yeah, one way or the other.
Yeah. Prime Minister of Canada is not going to say anything.
Yeah. Yeah, not likely. Okay, so there's a couple of other things I want to hear you on, and whether, because you've just got this long history of polling, and then the obvious caveat that we're putting out there, which is who the hell knows what's going to happen in this one because it's unlike anything we've seen. But is it easier still in this day and age to reinforce public opinion or to change it?
It's always easier to reinforce than to change. Always. That said, I mean, what has happened is cynicism towards politics has grown.
Right.
The first thing that's happened is the erosion of partisan identification. I don't want to sound too academic here, but back in the
but it's
day,
important.
a majority of Canadians identified themselves with one of the parties. That is, they said, I'm a progressive conservative, I'm a liberal, I'm a new Democrat. That was part of their identity. It was partisan. Today, more people believe that Elvis is alive than hold a partisan identity.
Right.
But when you lose that partisan lens, see, if I'm a conservative, I don't have to think about Pierre Poilievre. I like him because I'm a conservative.
Yeah.
I don't have to watch Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
Because I'm a conservative. Once I become nothing, in order to form a judgment of Pierre Poilievre or to Mark Carney, the irony of all of this is I've got to listen to them. I've got to pay more attention to politics to make a political decision to political decision today than you did in the past when I was way more trustworthy of the system. And this is what creates that volatility. First, you don't have that partisan route. But secondly, people actually change their minds. As many as 33% of electors will change their mind. Again, the Abacus poll, almost 50% of current liberal voters say that they might change their mind between now and the 28th. Almost 60% of New Democrat voters. And even the reliable conservative base, which is always the hardest, 27%. Over a quarter of them say they might change their name. So this, to your question, always easy to reinforce public opinion, but public opinion right now is so malleable and so brittle.
If that's the case, then you're saying, I want to change and I'm going to stay with change, and the affordability issues are still ruining my life and all of that. So you would reinforce that. What we saw with that huge turnaround in the polls, with where the Liberals went from nothing to being in the lead, why would the default position of Canadian voters be, okay, never mind those 10 years, I'm going to put that out of my head? And why would they give the benefit of the doubt to the Liberals and put their trust back there if they've spent the last 10 years saying these guys aren't doing it right?
It's time to go. Well, again, we forget, Kim Campbell was leading the polls when she called the election in 1993. Now, what she did is she waited 7 months there and created some vulnerabilities along the way, and then ran a terrible campaign. And so, Carney is very, very smart to pull the plug right away before that's there. But as I say, he still represents that brand, and that brand is in relatively big trouble. And so campaigns will matter.
So it's always been kind of common wisdom that and it's not just the way the electoral cookie crumbles, although that's part of it because of the impact of the Torontos and the Montreals and the Vancouvers. But is it still the case with the breakdown in partisan identity that there are more liberals in the country than conservatives? Is the pool?
No, in fact, they're almost equal now. But I'll tell you what there is more of than anything else: more people who say that I find myself in the center. That's view
Yeah.
of myself is in the middle. The number of people who say I'm either strongly right wing or strongly left wing is only 13% of the population. 6% strong conservative, extreme conservative. 7% liberal. Almost 40% say I'm in the middle. And as I touched on earlier, it is those people who are in the middle,
Yeah.
it's been in the past, who are most likely to feel unrepresented by politics and the political options that are available. People who are on the extreme feel very well represented. From extreme right winger, I love Pierre Poilievre. Extreme left winger, I love Jagmeet Singh, and I even liked Justin Trudeau. If you were in the middle, for all three leaders, their approval ratings were in the negative ground. And again, this is one of the reasons I think by simply being a good manager and moving to the center, Carney's shown that middle can be represented. Why, by virtue of being in the middle, you don't hold the same emotional views as people who have stronger opinions, and that also will mean that their attachment to politics is also weaker. So we will see.
So the whole notion that we've been talking about here, which is the outside context problem, right? Like whatever Trump is going to say or do tomorrow, and whether he invades Panama or Greenland, and does that make us more nervous about whether he's coming here? So there's that outside unknown factor. Is there anything you can see domestically? An issue, for example. I mean, the energy issue is very intense, and what I can interpret from what Mr. Carney is doing is he's setting up Poilievre, Trump, and Danielle Smith as kind of the enemy on the energy front, right? He's linking those three people. He did it in a speech the other day. What like, I don't know, national unity, the threat of maybe not Quebec separating, but the West. Like, do you see anything there that might change people's minds?
Well, in fact, on the resource sector, if he's saying that, that's a mistake. I mean, I would jump those three together as making as social conservatives, or saying that they believe in things that you don't believe in, or they're extremists. But I certainly wouldn't want to challenge them on resource development, because I think right now one
No,
of the
but
more
it's in
interesting.
how they're dealing with Trump as well, right? That they're not standing up to him.
Right.
Yeah.
That they're the same type. But I mean, one of the more interesting things for me, taking my pollster hat off, is what this crisis has done is caused us as a nation, our business leaders, our political leaders, to readdress issues that we've avoided for a long, long, long
Yeah,
time
exactly.
in a very serious way. I mean, Legault is saying, well, maybe we should talk about that pipeline that would go through Quebec to New Brunswick. Then maybe that's important. Whereas in 2017, it's just no way at all. And there's no question. There's also kind of unrelated to political choice stuff, is that there's been a kind of fatigue with a lot of the climate change stuff among the population. Look, the carbon tax is a perfect example.
Yeah.
This has been in place for how long? Tell me again. And how much have we reduced our carbon emissions as a consequence? How effective could that be if nothing has happened while gasoline prices have gone up 17 cents a liter? And so it's that kind of thinking. It's not to say I don't care about the environment. And it's just that there's also a lot more pragmatism. I mean, the kind of hesitancy or dubiousness around electronic vehicles we've seen has grown tremendously in the last couple years.
Don't work
and
when it's
just,
40 below, as you well know.
Yeah.
I
Well,
can't
it isn't
have
even
one.
it isn't even all those practical things. It's, I think if they work perfectly, I don't think that's a silver bullet anymore. It just doesn't strike me that I'm the source of the problem. That if I change my behavior, the world is going to change. It's like that iceberg that crashed into the ocean. I mean, what am I supposed to do about that?
So yes, it's possible that these things over the course of the campaign may start to resonate a little bit, but it's we're really still dealing with external shock rather than people. Because the other thing is, like you say, the whole issue of the environment. I mean, Trump has made it so stark, but the disaffection with DEI or with ESG or with the environmental issues, that had already started. And companies were pulling away, but he capitalized on it.
Yes.
We're a
Well, in
different
fact, he's
place.
yes. Yeah. Although again, I mean, you see it in Canada too. The Pathway Alliance,
Yeah,
the companies are working out of the oil sands. I mean, you can see them pulling back as well,
yeah.
and it is part
And
of
the banks.
part of the frustration with the climate change agenda that the population is seeing is also kind of a little dose of realism that we're not going to get rid of fossil fuel in my lifetime.
Right.
And so the notion that that's the big panacea, that's just pain for me. And they associate, improvements in that space. In the internal areas, one, we talked about elections, and you talked about the 1984 election and Brian Mulroney saying that
Yeah.
you, sir, had an option. And that is kind of common history. He says that was the changing point in the election. It wasn't, in fact. It was the night before in the French language debate
Okay.
where Quebecers sat and looked at their television set and said, Mon Dieu, there's only one prime minister on this screen. And that Ed Broadbent and
Yeah.
John Turner just did not, by comportment and especially by facility in the French language,
Yeah.
meet that test. And so we started to see that night the change starting to move in Quebec. Whereas you remember, it used to be an absolute wasteland for the Conservatives. We
Yeah.
won 2 seats in Quebec. That was
Yeah.
a
It was a good
victory.
day.
That's right. That is something else I think we should watch closely.
Yeah, because that's coming. Mark Carney's decision not to participate in the TDI debate.
Yes, and
Although
there's a
he'll do
reason for that.
yeah, he'll do a debate in French, but he won't. But
Has to.
it's raised the question, and the Bloc Québécois has sort of seized on that, which is, come on, it's a
Yeah.
test. Um,
And right now, I mean, what they're benefiting from, the Liberals are benefiting from, is not just the specifics of the threat from the United States, but the byproduct of that threat, where I've never seen Quebecers more likely to identify with Canada than
yeah,
they do right now. Not since I worked in the 1980 referendum, and so you've got this kind of and that just completely deflates
yeah,
BQ support anyway. So that is
and that helps the
incredibly.
Liberals again if that
It
vote
really
disappears.
does, but it's
Yeah,
at a really, you can't think of a more ephemeral help
yeah.
than that, a rise in Canadian nationalism in the province of Quebec benefiting one party
Look, I've
over the
got it.
others.
These are anecdotal stories that are worth nothing, but I mean, I was literally in Montreal last week. 2 things. I saw Canadian flags on homes in Montreal, not a sight that you see regularly. And the Uber driver, we were trying to communicate. My French is pretty rusty. His English was pretty non-existent. And I began with my apologies. I started to say something in French and then pulled myself back. And then he apologized for not speaking English. Again, something that hasn't happened for quite a while.
So that's an internal issue that I think we should watch very, very closely,
Yeah,
because I could see that change.
that having an impact. Okay, a couple of other things I want to touch on. So, and I remember in the last time we spoke, we did this about how polling has changed. You can't phone people on a landline because they don't have one. And in this kind of atmosphere, are people answering their cell phones when it says pollster or spam up there? Like, can you even get, but yet the polls seem to be really feeling this one. So can you still do it? Can you still do it with all the forces against it?
Yeah, there's lots of problems with polling. We have talked about that before, but there's also the law of large numbers. If you
Yeah.
do enough of these things, you get it right. If I went and interviewed everyone in Canada, I'd be 100% right, wouldn't I? Now, so
Provided they weren't lying
there's
to you. Yeah.
And there's so many polls out there right now, and they do vary. I mean, you've got some polls that have
Yeah.
got the Conservatives still 3 points ahead. I saw one today that's got the Liberals 8 points ahead. That's outside the bounds of error. It's 11 points
Yeah.
there between that. But yeah, we can. It's harder to get where you run into trouble is where where taking a particular position is, if not socially reprehensible, not socially desirable. So even when things were way better, for example, had a really hard time picking up social credit voters in BC because no one wanted to admit
Right. That
they
they
were
were
social credit voters.
voting
This
so
this
great.
really this really happened with Donald Trump in 2016. There's no
Yeah.
question. They just had a really hard time either getting to Trump voters or getting Trump voters to say they were going to vote Trump. There's no kind of unacceptable choice right now in Canada. So I don't think that social desirability uh, takes place. And as long as we're doing, as many are, aggregating the polls that are there and looking at the averages, we'll have a pretty good sense every day where we are in the horse race side of things.
The other thing, and you were talking about this on your own podcast, Red Tory, that I was listening to, the decision and the role of the media. Okay, so most members of the media in this country now are subsidized to some degree through government legislation and funds that they have taken from the Googles of the world and all the rest. So Peter Menzies been writing about this. There's kind of a vested interest on the part of those allegedly covering the campaign in a neutral way for a particular outcome. But when you see a Pierre Poilievre say, okay, we're not going to do a campaign bus and you guys have to find your way to, Wadena, Saskatchewan, all on your own. Good luck. There's no buses, trains, or, EVs. So that is, I mean, is that a high risk measure or just a reflection of the fact that those numbers in your more, your traditional media, your mainstream media are just not that impactful anymore?
Well, I mean, it really is a demonstration of how little conservatives, Pierre Poilievre, value legacy media. The stuff that I do again and again, whether it's the Canadian Journalism Foundation, the Public Policy Forum, or just on our own, shows that, well, more and more people are getting news off social media. There's no
Yeah,
question about that. The news they're getting is from legacy media off social.
right.
You
It's an
know, and,
echo.
and
Yeah,
yeah, and you say, oh, Joe Rogan gets 1 million viewers. Well, yeah, there's 330 million people. That means he's got 329 million that don't listen to him, knucklehead. Uh, and there's no question it's growing, and then especially young people are getting, almost all. I mean, a lot of them are getting using TikTok instead of
yeah,
Google
yeah.
for searches. But the legacy media still is a major source of information, if not opinion, for most voters, people who actually vote and follow politics closely. And so I think they're making a very big mistake by keeping the journalists off their bus and off their plane and hoping they kind of show up willy-nilly at whatever kind of events, especially, and not just because of what I just said, but it still has influence of the electorate, especially given what his challenge is. And his challenge is he's got to show himself as more relatable than Mark Carney. And to do that, he's got to show his personality. And to do that, he's got to use media. And he's got to be able to reach the largest audience possible with that demonstration of personality.
But with the use of social media, I mean, he's getting into a lot of people's phones and homes just directly with no filter, as it were.
The strategy has always been more today than ever before, but the strategy has always been in politics in Canada and using social media is not to run it in the social media because they know they don't reach hardly anyone, is to see how the legacy media will cover the social
Yeah,
media that you generate.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and they do. I mean, you want to see what Donald Trump's genius at commanding political discourse for the last decade has been. It's the willingness of traditional media to follow every goddamn thing he does, every tweet. How is
they
that
invented
news?
him. They invented
Yeah,
him.
no,
Anderson
but they are
Cooper.
completely his enabler in that front. If they all got together and said, you know what, that's not news. I'm not covering that anymore. I'm not covering what he says in Truth and Social. If he holds a press conference, we'll cover it. See how long that lasts.
Well, the thing is, though, and what Trump is doing is everything is a press conference. If he is meeting the
true.
King of Spain, or if he's signing an executive order, it turns into a 50-minute exchange where the cameras from Legacy are there, and you don't dare cut out in case he announces something that nobody ever thought of before in the last 5 minutes. Right?
No, but you're right. His accessibility is off the charts. I don't think we've ever seen a political leader, let alone who has that much output, but who's that available also.
Yeah. All right. So what's going to happen, Allan?
As I say, the wise mentor once told me, he says, if you make a prediction, don't put a date on
it. Exactly. That's a very good thing. Yes, there'll be a change in the government.
No, to the start of our conversation, I mean, I was very, very active involved in politics for 25 years. Party politics, did a lot of campaigns, and so it's kind of in my blood. But there's been a lot of campaigns, since I got, stopped being a political pollster. Right. That I just said, 2006, 2008. Yes, this one is riveting, and I won't be able to get too far away from my various sources of information and stimulation over the next 5 weeks.
So that might be good. I mean, it might mean that turnout, is high. It might be a little bit of a silver lining. Yeah. Great conversation, Allan. Thank you very much.
Always good talking to you, Pam. You take care of yourself.
Great to see you. Allan Gregg, principal at Ernst Cliff Strategies, co-host of the Red Tory podcast. It is interesting. We actually have to explain what that means. It used to be kind of a concept, and just has been doing this for an entire lifetime, and always really good to get inside your head, because he's more social scientist than pollster these days. So it's great. We'll see you soon. Have fun. We'll talk again. Allan Gregg. And that's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. We'll see you very soon too. Thanks.